I'll move on to Sheila. And my question for Sheila is to start by referring to the situation in the States, and in particular, it struck me that taking good ideas from the lab and applying them in practice is sometimes difficult to achieve successfully. And so I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about the DOE's Net Zero Labs pilot initiative, and how this will both promote energy efficiency and create solutions that are replicable, perhaps obviously in the context of primarily the cooling issue, but they are all, everything is so related, isn't it? But
yeah, well, thank you very much, Brian. And I'm going to start out answering that question by also giving some background about what ASHRAE is doing in this space as well. So both ASHRAE and the DOE. So I'd first like to say that throughout my career, I really have been fortunate enough to be surrounded by people that are really pushing the boundaries of figuring out what we can do in the building sector so that we can make buildings as energy efficient as possible and minimize their environmental impact overall. And so we've been thinking about how do we do this for a long time, and I enjoyed talking with you, Brian, before we started, talking about some of the early days of passive solar design, when that was like the thing that we were really focused on 30, 40 years ago, and thinking about how we've evolved from that to where we are now, and still working on how can we push that envelope of what we can do in the building sector. ASHRAE has been a very active part of this conversation throughout its existence. ASHRAE has existed, it's been around for just over 125 years now. And during that time, it has continuously been a world leader in developing technical solutions, standards, educational products, and things like that to really help all of us professionals in the buildings industry have those guidelines, those tools that we need so that we know how to think about how do we address those big challenges that we're facing now and those big challenges that we expect to face tomorrow? So I have been, as Brian said earlier, I've been deeply engaged in ASHRAE for a long time. Just to help you all familiarize with what ASHRAE is, we have a lot in common with SIPSI. So we have a very similar type of membership. Our goals as far as the types of products and services that we strive to develop are very similar, and as a result, ASHRAE and SIPSI have been partners for a very long time in this space. But to talk a little bit about what ASHRAE is doing in this area, it recognizes that decarbonizing our building sector is the big challenge that we need to address now. That we have been thinking a lot about energy efficiency and other things through the decades, but we need to move on to carbon. And that buildings have such a huge impact, environmental impact on this planet, that it is our responsibility to take on this challenge and to find those solutions. So ASHRAE has developed a position on decarbonization and is now acting on that position and beginning to think about how can it take steps to really help our industry move forward. So ASHRAE's position on building decarbonization is that the solutions must be holistic. We need to be thinking about how do we address all of the aspects of the built environment and how the buildings interact with other energy systems that serve the building environment. So the generation of the like power generation, the transportation sector that's now electrifying, that's going to be part of our building loads. All of those things are part of that big picture. We have to take that holistic solution or holistic approach when we're finding solutions. And we need to find solutions that are going to ensure that we continue to have safe and comfortable environments, that prioritize energy efficiency as one of the first means of what we do to decarbonize our built environment, that we think about the environmental impacts of our built environment, the decisions that we're making. Of course, we continue to prioritize sustainability and all of the things that go along with making an environment sustainable, thinking about operational security, and as well as the economic. So I enjoyed some of the comments that you're saying because they're very much in line with the challenges that we're identifying within our ASHRAE conversations as things that we need to address, including the economics. And ASHRAE does, we need to address these things because ASHRAE does envision that by 2030, we would like to make it possible so that all new buildings can operate as net zero carbon buildings, that there is widespread energy efficiency retrofits in the existing building stock, so that we really are pushing the boundaries on doing things as efficiently as we possibly can so that we are not generating as much carbon emissions from our buildings. And that we are really thinking about the embodied carbon in construction of new buildings, and that by 2030, if we can reduce the embodied carbon of new construction of our building stock by 40%, that is a goal that we're really hoping that we can achieve. So by doing this, I said that ASHRAE is thinking about how to approach these challenges in the products and service that it's doing. It's working very hard to incorporate carbon as an important metric in the standards that it currently has, in existing standards, develop new standards that are very focused on carbon emissions as well, and then using that as a driver to also provide other tools and resources to the industry so that all professionals in our industry have what they need for the guidance so that they can begin to implement these solutions in their own work. So now I'm going to switch over to the Net Zero Lab Initiative that Brian asked me about. So the Net Zero Lab Initiative, Net Zero Laboratory Initiative, is an effort that it was actually officially launched in May of this year when the U.S. Department of Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm had a big announcement saying DOE is committed to doing this. But for about the past 18 months or so, there have been 4 national labs in the DOE National Lab System that have been piloting this effort early on. These 4 national labs we've been working, well, and the lab that I work for is one of the 4 pilot labs. So we've been working closely together to begin to identify and to understand, get some early experiences in like defining the problem, saying, yes, you can set goals. You can say, we're going to be decarbonized by this year. We're going to do this. Well, that's the easy part. Then you have to figure out how you're going to meet those goals. And so building that roadmap and saying, how do we break this problem down into something that we can address now? And that's what these 4 national labs have been working on for about the past 18 months, so that we can begin to set an example and become a model for not only the all 17 labs in the DOE National Lab System, but also to be a model for all of the campuses that exist in the U.S. federal sector, as well as to set the stage for campus operation anywhere in the world. It doesn't have to be just in the U.S. federal government. These are solutions that will be applicable or could be replicated, or could be, people could learn from them and modify as needed so that they can apply similar solutions in their own places. So the 4 pilot labs, one of the really interesting things about bringing these labs together is that they have campuses that are located in nearly all of the 7 climate zones that are represented in the United States. And so the solutions that are being developed will be solutions that can be applied in just about anywhere in the world. These 4 climate zones, range from very hot and humid to very cold and dry and everything in between. And so well representation of climate zones, the campuses that are included in with these 4 national labs range in size of campus, age of the buildings and the infrastructure on the campuses, as well as the type of work that's done on these campuses. So each of the national labs have very different mission focuses, which means the solutions that are going to be found for those campuses to decarbonize them are going to be aligned with the mission of the labs, and will also have a large range of solutions that will be available for others to learn from as well. So these mission focuses have a very large range, going from energy efficiency to renewable energy, nuclear energy, carbon capture and sequestration, looking at advanced controls for how you operate campus operations, like through microgrid type systems. All of these types of things are represented in the 4 pilot labs that are participating in this initiative, or participating in the pilot initiative. So in each of these national labs, they have set targets. I mentioned before, setting the target's the easy part. Finding how you're going to meet that target's the hard part. But targets have been set. And we are anticipating that we will begin to see some early successes as early as the end of next year, as the end of 2023. We will have at least one of these campuses. It's a smaller campus, but it will be fully electrified and will be fully decarbonized by the end of next year. Most of the national labs, especially with their larger campuses, are looking at full decarbonization, net decarbonization by 2030. With the ability to demonstrate 24/7 carbon-free operation about that time as well. There's a lot of differences here. Being able to demonstrate 24/7 carbon-free operation means you need to have access to carbon-free electricity 24 hours a day, which until our grids are fully decarbonized is a bigger challenge. So there are lots of steps along this way. But I do want to say, as I kind of wrap up these comments, that one of the biggest challenges that all the labs are facing is how do you pay for these measures? How to finance the measures that need to be implemented in order to fully decarbonize and to meet these aggressive goals? And that goes back to another one of your comments that you're saying is it's hard to do this because it doesn't investing in measures to decarbonize doesn't always result in something that saves money. And without being able to save money, it's hard to justify the investment. So for example, changing out natural gas boilers and say a district heating system to something like a ground source heat pump will achieve the goal of decarbonizing the systems that supply that district heating system, but it might not necessarily save energy. So how do you go in there and say, we're going to spend the money to do this very large infrastructure improvement without having a payback for it? So these are the types of challenges that are being faced. But it doesn't mean that measures can't be taken right now. And the labs are working on that very much, including things like aggressive energy efficiency measures, making sure that the policies of the operational decisions are prioritizing decarbonization first, doing some things like that. So to finish up here, I'd just like to say that some of the efforts like through the Net Zero Lab Initiative, the things that ASHRAE is doing that I mentioned earlier, and the things that we'll hear from the other members of this panel tonight, these are the first steps that we are figuring out how to address this problem. It's a big problem. We all know that we need to think about it. We need to take those first steps, and we're learning how to do it as we go. But the really fun thing, the really exciting thing about this is that these are the types of things that are at the very front end of a fundamental shift in how we in the building sector are thinking about designing and operating our built environment. And I just think it's super cool that all of us are here in the room tonight, that we're thinking about it, that we're ready to make this change, and that we're going to be finding those solutions together. So
great. Thank you, Sheila. It's great to have your overview, both, well, firstly from an ASHRAE perspective, but then also get an update on the labs initiative, which we're all looking forward to seeing the results from.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sheila.